Hades 2 recently released into early access, and as expected, it is really, really good. It continues with a lot of what made the first game great, with the tight and weighty combat, gorgeous character design, intriguing narrative, and consistent upgrades, but adds enough of a twist to make it feel fresh, as a sequel should. The combat focuses a little more on range than the first, playing into the fact that your character this time, Melenui, is a witch. The individual weapons are nicely varied, much like the first game, but feel very different from anything we used in that game. Structurally, the game does feel very familiar if you've played the first. It's a roguelike dungeon crawler where you go from room to room, unlocking one of a few choices of upgrades at the end of each completed room or encounter, then eventually facing a boss at the end of the floor before moving on to the next. This is to be expected, but the game teases more early on and looks far more expansive than the first in terms of variety of content, if what I've heard is correct. I've only played around 7 hours, having made it to the boss of the second floor, one of the coolest bosses I've ever seen in a video game, I might add. So I can't speak to the direction it goes so much, but the game has gripped me from the first run. It feels great, the music is great, the art is great, the voice acting is great, the story and writing is great, and the world design is great. It's essentially exactly what we've come to expect from Supergiant Games as a studio, but even more surprising. It takes some fantastic turns in terms of boss design, integration of music, character design, and more that it simply cements the fact that Supergiant are the absolute top of the indie studio pantheon, pun intended. Supergiant's first game was Bastion, released in 2011, a brooding post-apocalyptic action-adventure game, with a world consisting of floating islands that appear in front of you as you navigate each level, and a dynamic narrator wonderfully voiced by Logan Cunningham. Then came Transistor in 2014, a sci-fi RPG with strategic, turn-based combat, and once again, a narrator, the titular Transistor, voiced once more by Logan Cunningham. Their third game, Pyre, was certainly the biggest curveball in the studio's tenure. It's a narrative, team-based fantasy sports game with RPG elements. It is also narrated by Logan Cunningham. Then we come to Hades. Released in 2020, it felt like a culmination of everything the studio had produced up to this point. You could see elements of Bastion in the weapon and combat structure, Transistor in the way the story is told through hints and pieced together throughout the playthrough, and Pyre through the artwork, character design, and animation. You can see the team not only improving their craft individually, but collectively becoming a studio that makes more and more interesting games with a distinct Supergiant flavour. A large part of why this is the case is the fact that the core team has been more or less the same since the studio's inception. Amir Rao's level design, Gen Z's art, Darren Korb's music and sound design, and the voice of Logan Cunningham runs through each of these titles, alongside the technical work of Gavin Simon and creative direction of Greg Kasavin, among others. This has allowed the team to hone their craft together, and as a result, the games have only improved over the years. In an article for Kotaku in 2019, Nathan Grayson writes, "Hades would not be possible, said Rao and Kasavin, without the games that came before it and specific people who made them. It's a reaction to Pyre, which was a reaction to Transistor, which was a reaction to Bastion." In an interview in the same article, Greg Kasavin, creative director at Supergiant, said, "We talk about how our games are very much built around the idiosyncrasies of the people on the team. Music is a central point because of Darren, voiceover is there because of Logan Cunningham, and so on. Instead of trying to force everyone into the same work pattern, it's recognised that with creative people, different stuff makes them tick. It can be argued that this consistency and quality is only possible because of the studio's complete independence. They are not working to the whim of a publisher or some corporate entity overseeing every aspect of their production. Each of their games has been self-published, with the exception of their first game, Bastion, which was originally released under Warner Bros. Games. While we can imagine a world in which businesses see the success of Supergiant and might try to take a leaf out of their book and work towards creating a more healthy environment in which creative collaboration and comfort in the workplace is prioritised and encouraged, we unfortunately don't live in that world. In the same week as early access release of Hades 2, we saw the shuttering of 4 studios by Microsoft from under the Bethesda umbrella. Alpha Dog Games, a mobile game development studio which recently released Mighty Doom, soon to be sunsetted as a result. Roundhouse Studios, a support studio that will be dissolved into ZeniMax to work on the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, I must admit, I didn't know much about either of those 2 studios prior to this announcement. Not that that makes their closure any less brutal. But the announcement of the closure of Arkane Studios and Tango Gameworks was a real kicker and sent shockwaves through the games industry. Arkane Austin was the developer of the recently released Redfall, a critical and commercial failure by many metrics, but a game that was likely encouraged by an overbearing publisher looking to push further into a live service market. But they are also the developer of Prey, released in 2017, a modern cult classic in the sci-fi and immersive sim genres, and they helped with the development of Dishonored, a game that has become incredibly influential for its distinct artistic style and fluid player-driven combat encounters. That studio is now gone. Dinga Bakaba of sister studio Arkane Leon put it best when he tweeted, "Don't throw us into gold fever gambits. Don't use us as straw men for miscalculations and blind spots. Don't make our work environments Darwinist jungles. You say we make you proud when we make a good game. Make us proud when times are tough. We know you can. We've seen it before." And then we have Tango Gameworks, developer of the recent Game Award winning Hi-Fi Rush, developer of what is considered one of the best survival horror games of all time, The Evil Within 2, a studio founded by Shinji Mikami, one of the creators of the Resident Evil series and a pioneer of survival horror and an icon across the games industry. Hi-Fi Rush, of course, is not a survival horror game. It is a bright, colourful rhythm action game with an over-the-top comic book aesthetic and comedic writing, but it is definitely not the kind of game that would have been ordered by executives with the intention of milking the studio as a cash cow. It was a creative swing and one that played off critically and, according to the words of Xbox higher-ups, commercially. Aaron Greenberg, Vice President of Games Marketing at Xbox, said after Hi-Fi Rush's release, "Hi-Fi Rush was a breakout hit for us and our players in all key measurements and expectations. We couldn't be happier with what the team at Tango Gameworks delivered with this surprise release." Mikami had left Tango Gameworks not long after Hi-Fi Rush's release. When first founding Tango Gameworks, he said of its creation, "I really want to make Tango a company run from a creator's perspective, one that expands upon new talent." It is certainly easy to speculate that his vision for the studio going forward wouldn't be possible under Microsoft. As anyone who follows games media coverage knows, these are not the only studio closures to happen in recent months. In the past few weeks alone, we have seen the announcement that Take-Two Interactive, owner of the most profitable single entertainment product of all time, GTA 5, was to shutter 2 studios from under its Private Division banner. Private Division was set up to publish indie and AA games for Take-Two. Games such as The Outer Worlds and even the physical edition of Hades were published under Private Division. Just this year has seen the release of Penny's Big Breakaway and the early access release of No Rest for the Wicked, released under the label. Intercept Studios was a studio that was set up by Take-Two under the Private Division label to work on Kerbal Space Program 2. But after the game launched poorly into early access, it seems, the studio has been closed and the future of the project left unclear. Roll7, the developer of the Ollie Ollie series, most recently Ollie Ollie World, nominated for Best Sports Game at the Game Awards 2022, as well as Rollerdrome, winner of the BAFTA Game Awards for Best British Game, was also shuttered. It doesn't matter how profitable the parent company is or how successful the studio is. The decision of profit over creative integrity will always throw dollar signs into the eyes of the C-suite. I don't care if Microsoft makes money on a game like Hi-Fi Rush or Hellblade or Pentiment, or if Take-Two makes profit on games like Rollerdrome or Ollie Ollie World, because I know they are making insane profits elsewhere that could be pushed into nurturing talented developers and creating interesting games. Why else would Take-Two have set up an indie publishing label in the first place? The fact that they make a conscious decision not to work in that way and shut studios down to focus teams on their larger big hitter franchises stinks of corporate greed. Neither Microsoft or Take-Two is being affected by any sort of financial crisis or economic downturn. They are seeing record profits and closing studios to bolster those figures. And I think what makes this an even harder pill to swallow is the fact that Microsoft and Xbox were so integral in allowing indie games to flourish and become what they are today. Supergiant Games' first game, Bastion, was originally released under the Xbox Live Arcade banner in 2011, which was one of the first console-based digital distribution services for smaller indie games, whose smaller development teams often couldn't afford the physical production and distribution needed to release games at the time. It was a service that was influential in leading to the indie boom of the late 2000s and early 2010s, and went on to shape the indie games industry to what we know it as now. Pioneering games such as Super Meat Boy, Fez, Castle Crashers, Braid, and Limbo were originally released under the Xbox Live Arcade banner, allowing millions of people to play a much wider variety of interesting and artistic games on the Xbox 360 console. It truly did feel like Microsoft were pushing for the same idea of bolstering indie games with the release of Xbox Game Pass, allowing players to try out a larger variety of games for a much lower financial barrier to entry. And maybe this can still be the case, but it just doesn't seem to be for their first-party studios in the future. I respect that Tango, Gameworks and Arkane Austin weren't exactly indie studios, but they are producing games that are niche relative to the titans of Bethesda Game Studios or 343 within the Xbox Game Studios banner. Hi-Fi Rush especially was certainly a confident diversion from a developer known for dark, gritty horror games, which felt like a breath of fresh air and gave lots of hope for how Microsoft would be supporting these studios with their creative ambitions moving forward, which clearly is no longer the case. Xbox has bought so many studios with bold creative ideas. Obsidian having recently released Pentiment, Double Fine with Psychonauts, Ninja Theory with Hellblade. Where do these studios with such strong histories now stand within the Xbox Game Studios monolith? We are living in a golden age of indie games, with just the past few weeks having seen No Rest for the Wicked, Another Crab's Treasure, Animal Well, Manor and of course Hades 2 launch, just to name a few. But with so many studios being owned or part owned by bigger corporate entities, how long can this golden age last? Or are we heading towards a new revolution in the way indie studios are funded? A return to crowdfunding? I don't know. It's obviously hard to say, and I might seem overly dramatic. But when the industry has seen so much destruction at the hands of executive decisions, it's hard not to be cynical. I love video games, and if you're watching this, you probably do as well. It's an industry that thrives when people making the games we love making those games. Passion is what drives the games industry forward, not profits to be hoarded by executives, not corporate mergers and industry consolidation, but bold creative ideas drawn out through collaboration. As a wise man once said, I want shorter games with worse graphics made by people who are paid more to work less, and I am not kidding. Thank you so much for watching. I know that this was a bit of a bummer topic. Hopefully the rest of the future of my content will be less doom and gloom if the games industry decides to improve. But anyway, if you want to catch me over on Twitch, I stream once a week, twitch.tv/JakeItUp. And of course, please like and subscribe. And I will keep making things like this. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.